Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It's 2022 and landlords are still a-holes, everyone knows that. But residential landlords have nothing on commercial ones. The landlords that own office buildings and strip malls are the cruelest, nastiest people I've encountered. This story of revenge involves a commercial landlord and how my colleague and I got back at him. Back in 2017, I would sometimes go to this restaurant in the basement of my office building for lunch. The place was called The Vault because it had a massive old bank vault dating back to when the space was a bank branch. The vault was so big they could fit a couple tables inside, surrounded by rows of antique safe deposit boxes. It made for a cool vibe. One afternoon, I was there eating when the owner came over looking stressed. "The landlord is annoying the hell out of me," he said. "That guy bothers everyone in this building," I replied. As a subtenant sharing office space upstairs, my colleague Aaron and I had our own problems with the landlord, who we hated at first sight. He was always causing issues and threatening to lock tenants out if rent was even a day late. He keeps demanding all this extra rent for stuff from years ago. It's really odd. The owner showed me a letter just served by the landlord with a long list of old maintenance and repair charges going back over a decade. At the end, the usual threat that he would change the locks if the tenant didn't comply. "How long has this fight been going on?" "Why didn't you speak to a lawyer sooner?" I asked. "I asked a lawyer I know, but he said I'm screwed." He named a mediocre real estate attorney barely staying afloat since the 2008 financial crisis forced him into cheap legal aid work. "Did you do something to make this guy hate you?" "He knows I'm moving the restaurant soon. I think he wants to grab as much cash as he can first. Plus, the vault is causing issues." "He won't let you take it?" "You kidding? That thing weighs 100 tons. I don't need it at the new location, but the lease says I have to remove it and also restore the space to before the vault was installed. Cost a fortune." "Let me take a look at the lease," I said. After lunch, I reviewed the document upstairs. The situation was just as bad as described. The lease was an old renewal of an assignment of another renewal, tracing back to shortly after World War II when a bank first installed the vault. Somehow the landlord had maneuvered the restaurant into inheriting a lease that stuck them with removing a bank vault or facing breach. But then I saw the guarantee clause on the final page. The restaurant owner had personally guaranteed the terms, leaving him on the hook for taking out a 100-ton vault and extensively renovating. Extremely expensive. Clearly no legal recourse for the restaurant here. But then I thought of the smug landlord with his absurd demands and threats. I asked my brain to cook up a solution, which it promptly did. I called the owner. "I'm screwed, right? No way out? I can get you off the hook, but it'll cost extra. How much?" $5,000 for legal fees, another $1,000 for an agent." "Agent? What for?" "Real estate. Get a cashier's check for the amount and I'll handle the rest." The payment arrived within the hour. I went to Aaron's office. "Need a real estate agent," I said. "Buying a place?" "Nah." "Selling?" "No again." After nearly 5 years sharing an office, Aaron knew me pretty well. "Another one of your stunts, I assume?" "Yep, but nothing that'll cause you issues." Aaron knew all kinds of people through his wide network, which eventually led to his disbarment, but he provided an agent's contact. I met with the agent the next day, gave him documents and cash. A few days later, I was back at the vault for lunch. The owner greeted me looking concerned. "Landlord's here," he said. Why? Luncheon to be a jerk. Let's sit in the vault so I don't have to see him." In the vault room, door almost closed, we talked over pasta and wine. "We're making demands on the landlord," I said between bites. "Demands? For what?" I slid over a document. "We're demanding he release all restaurant equipment and fixtures. Ovens, freezers, ventilation, everything you need to operate. The lease lets me take what I want anyway. Only the vault matters and I don't need that." "You do need the vault," I said. "We're insisting he allow its removal within 7 days." "You think reverse psychology will work on him?" "We'll see. He's had the demand a couple days now." The owner dropped his wine glass. "You already gave it to him?" "Let's find out his response," I said. We approached the landlord's table. Despite being alone, he was devouring a full lamb rack aggressively with his hands. "I need an answer today," I stated. "My client requires the vault for his new venue and must make arrangements." The landlord looked up, mouth full. "He can forget the damn vault." I feigned shock. "You can't do that." The landlord laughed arrogantly. "I'm the landlord. I'll do as I please. I'll need that refusal in writing. My client may sue." "Sue all you want," he spat, spewing crumbs of lamb. He agreed to provide a formal response by day's end. When the letter came claiming ownership of the vault, I showed my crestfallen client. "How did you make that happen?" he asked, astounded. "Trade secret," I winked. The next month, the restaurant had moved out. The new location was a 20-minute drive away, named The Vault, preserving the original vibe just without the actual vault. The mammoth vault remained behind, still occupying the basement where I rented space. I arrived at work shortly after to find Aaron waiting. "Landlord is pissed at you," he warned. "For what now?" Says his deal fell through. "What deal?" "Supposed to lease the empty space to a bank or credit union. They didn't show up to sign." "And what's that got to do with me?" I repeated both to Aaron and 2 days later when the landlord tracked me down, jowls quivering in rage. "I know your trick with the bullcrap offer to keep the vault so your client could skip out. I'm suing!" "If you need counsel, I'll have to declare a conflict. I'll sue them all, the restaurant, the agent, and especially you." He stomped off. But of course, no lawsuit ever came. No valid contract to sue on, just a vague letter of intent I had drafted, enough to hook a greedy landlord expecting submission. The offer was non-binding without a formal lease, which was never signed. A year later, when I left, Aaron's office was still vacant, with a faded "for rent" sign gathering dust in the window. "I know you sabotaged this somehow," the landlord had said. He was right, but there was nothing he could do about it. We had taken our revenge on an arrogant bully, and it felt fantastic. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My grandparents built the house and started the farm, then passed it down to my parents, and now it's mine. I love this place more than anything. The rolling green hills, the big oak tree I used to climb as a kid, the little creek where I catch crawdads. It's my home. A few years ago, a new housing development sprang up right next to our property. I didn't think much of it at first. New neighbors are fine. Then I met Karen. Karen was one of the first to buy in the new development. Right away, she started acting like she owned the whole area, not just her little cookie-cutter house. She'd complain about normal farm noises like roosters crowing or cows mooing. She'd call the sheriff when dust from the tractor blew her way. Crazy stuff like that. I tried to be nice and explain that I'd been working this farm my whole life, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. It wasn't like these things were new. She didn't care. Karen just kept calling and complaining anytime I did my normal farm work. After a month or so of this, I started avoiding that side of the farm altogether. Wasn't worth the hassle of dealing with her. Things settled down for a bit once Karen didn't see me over there as much. But the peace didn't last long. One afternoon, I was out fixing some fence posts when I saw Karen tromping across my back field. She wasn't even staying to the property line, just cutting straight across my pasture. I hollered and waved my arms for her to stop, but she ignored me. When she got closer, I asked her just what in tarnation she thought she was doing trekking through my field. She gave me this smug little smile and said she had every right to be there. I told her that made no sense. She didn't own any of this land, it was all mine. But she just shook her head and kept walking. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Karen wandering around more and more. She put lawn chairs out right in the middle of my cow field. She acted like she had as much right to be there as me. I asked her to leave nicely at first, but she never did. Finally, I'd had enough. I called the sheriff out and asked him to talk to Karen about trespassing. He went and spoke to her, but she insisted she wasn't doing anything wrong. She claimed that according to her property records, her land extended well into my fields. That made no sense. Our farm had clearly defined, decades-old boundary lines, but she kept insisting the records showed she owned a big chunk of my fields. There was no reasoning with her. The sheriff said it looked like a civil property dispute and there wasn't much he could do. Frustrated, I called my cousin, who worked as a paralegal, to ask her advice. She offered to look over the property records and surveys for me to get to the bottom of this. Turns out, Karen was right that the county records did show her land extending way further than it should. Something fishy was going on. With my cousin's help, we dug into the records and found the issue. Just before the development started, all the plat maps got transferred to digital files. Somewhere in that process, a county clerk made a mistake and assigned a huge chunk of my farm as belonging to the new development land. No idea how they messed up so bad, but that's what the records showed now. Armed with this info, my cousin advised me to get a lawyer to straighten out the property lines officially. I was dreading hiring a lawyer, worried about the cost, but she convinced me it was the only way. Boy, do I regret listening to her. The lawyer I hired was named Susan. She seemed nice and competent at first. We went over all the paperwork showing the property should be mine. Then she filed motions to get the records corrected. For a few weeks, Susan told me things were progressing well through the system. Karen even stopped coming around as much, so I figured problem solved. Then I got a letter from the county clerk. They were denying my request to correct the records. I didn't understand how that could be. I called Susan immediately and she assured me not to worry. This was just a small setback. She'd file an appeal and take care of it all. I should trust her expertise and it would get sorted out. Over the next few months, I kept getting notices that my appeals and motions were all getting denied or dismissed. No matter what Susan filed, we just kept losing. She kept telling me to be patient, these things take time. She promised she could fix it. I didn't know much about the legal system, so I listened to her. By now, Karen was back to her old antics, only worse. She put up fences cutting off my access to parts of my own fields. She had signs made up claiming the land as her property. She even had a big paddock built for some horses right in the middle of my cow pasture. It was out of control. When I pleaded with Susan to do something, to take real action, she said her hands were tied until the land records got fixed. I was getting really worried now. Karen was taking over more and more of our farm while Susan just kept telling me to be patient. That's when my cousin called me, frantic, saying I needed to look up something about my lawyer right away. In all the chaos, I'd never done any real research on Susan. I didn't know much about her background or experience with property disputes. When I pulled up her info online, everything became clear in an instant. Susan specialized in real estate law for developers. She'd worked for years helping big-time developers get land bought up cheap to build subdivisions and developments, the same kind of development that was built right by my farm. In fact, Susan was actually listed as the legal counsel who worked on buying up the land for my neighborhood. No wonder she wasn't doing a dang thing to help me in court. She probably knew the county clerk who messed up my records. They were likely in on this together. I saw red. This lawyer I had trusted to save my land had played me for a fool. She never intended to correct the records in my favor. She was just stringing me along until the land was considered Karen's. Probably would have gotten a big payday from developer buddies once Karen's property value went up. Now I was mad. I got back in touch with my cousin and she helped me get a consultation with the meanest, toughest property rights attorney in the county. His name was Ted and he was expensive, but I didn't care anymore. I told Ted exactly what Susan had pulled. How she pretended to help while working against me the whole time. Ted's eyes lit up. Nothing gets a lawyer excited like another lawyer screwing up big time. He told me we were going after Susan for ethics violations, fraud, negligence, all of it. He was going to dig up every nasty thing she ever touched. It felt so good seeing the look on Susan's face when Ted served her papers for a lawsuit. I told her not to doubt a farmer protecting his land ever again. Ted was brutal in his filings. He got statements from the developers, clerks, even pulled canceled checks showing payoffs between them. He buried Susan. The ethics board had no choice but to censure her for misconduct. They suspended her law license temporarily while the criminal charges for fraud were pending. Susan tried to claim she didn't think her history with the developers was relevant to my case. The board wasn't buying it. Of course, we also got my land records corrected immediately once Susan was out of the picture. The judge apologized for all the delays and errors. With Ted there glaring at him, he was falling over himself to fix it. Karen put up a big fuss when we resurveyed and put up new fence posts around the correct property lines. Too bad for her. She ended up having to tear down that paddock and move her precious horses way back onto her own land. I walked my fence lines every day for a month just to enjoy the sight of the no trespassing signs keeping Karen far away. Ted made sure she and I both understood that if she so much as put a toe across that fence, she'd be arrested for trespassing and sued to kingdom come. The feeling when Ted handed me the official court orders granting me back all rights to my family's farm, I can't even describe it. It wasn't just the land at stake, it was my family's legacy. Thanks to Ted, and to me not being afraid to stand up to that crooked lawyer Susan, I got it all back. Don't mess with a farmer's land unless you want the whole legal field plowed up from under you. I learned that the hard way, but sometimes the hard lessons are the most rewarding. My old farmhouse porch has never felt so sweet as it does nowadays. Looking out over those green fields really makes a man appreciate this life we've been blessed with. The next one is a petty revenge story. This story took place in 2004. Each story about work is at a separate company. It all started when a new colleague joined our ragtag bunch of systems engineers deploying ground-based radars around the world. From day one, I could tell there was something off about him. He had these weird mannerisms of always trying to one-up someone else's story and be the center of attention. He struck me as one of those guys who would look you in the eye and smile as he sinks the knife into your back and kiss the wound after getting what he wants. He was also one of those guys who tried to steal everyone else's thunder. Needless to say, he was overly ambitious, constantly trying to undermine me and take credit for my work. I tried to brush it off, hoping it was just a phase, but things only escalated. One day, I discovered he was spreading false rumors about me to senior management, trying to sabotage my career. Basically, this sniveling bitchous punk tried telling management I was drinking on the job, appeared high, was very combative and threatening, and an insider threat as he saw me always carrying around external hard drives and must be stealing corporate data. My manager confronted me about the rumors and told me I was on restricted duty for 2 weeks while they investigated. I was furious, but decided to play it smart. I took PTO, vacation, for 2 weeks and came back to an unfounded report. Instead of confronting him directly, I started documenting everything. Every lie, every deceitful act, every instance of him trying to play games with my career. I also did something in the gray area by setting up surveillance cameras with sound around my area. Think nanny cams. One day I catch him on video speaking to a competitor and divulging proprietary information without an NDA. I then heard him talking to a vendor about an all-expense-paid trip to Hawaii during his vacation time for helping them make a sale with our company. Oh, that is an organizational conflict of interest burn. I knew I needed to act carefully. Using the company's ethics hotline, I anonymously reported his behavior, providing all the evidence I had gathered. The investigation took a few weeks, and during that time he continued his underhanded tactics, completely unaware of the storm heading his way. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. I was at my desk when I saw 2 HR representatives and a security guard walking toward him. They escorted him out of the building, and as he passed by my desk, he gave me a cold, knowing stare. He knew it was me who had reported him. I stood up, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Next time, find a toy and don't play with me." Yeah, HR did write me up for that line after taking out the trash. At the time I thought it was well worth it. The next one is a malicious compliance story, my first post here. First, I would like to thank you all for the amazing environment. I've been back to Reddit because of this place and reading up all the posts I can. I love that you all have a kink for justice as big as a kink for storytelling. My story begins working for a financial institution, heaps of overworking and abuse, and we were contractors from a company in Brazil. We worked 12-plus hour daily easily as we had to deploy stuff at midnight as it was a critical app. I was online all the time. I took all the heavy fire from the client who dealt directly with me. I had a manager who did nothing and despised me because the team loved me. She didn't know the teammates' names and things like this. We were the only team to have a planned on-duty schedule set up the month before, and everyone relied on us, client side and contractor company side. I was the only one the client had the cell phone and they never complained. This mangle woman loved to give everyone's phones to the client so he could call devs non-stop, Saturdays, Sundays, moon or sun on the sky. I've put my foot down for the first time with this. The second time she tried to send a 2-month girl intern to work with all males from another contractor company. You could imagine how workplace abuse would be dealt with. Alone. Now, I know there's a lot of amazing people in the world, but I wouldn't put my hand in the fire for the tech community, sorry. This was the second time I've put my foot down. We had an altercation in a call with the client, because I directly said the intern productivity would plummet having to work with a strange team and under rules that are not our company's. And this could even lead to a lawsuit. She was pissed. We hung up. She calls me alone 0.2 seconds later and scolds me asking how do I think questioning her would be perceived. Now, I'm a scrum master. The only thing I do is conduct meetings and defuse bombs, so I thought she could use the neuron I freely gave her with my explanation. And I answered, hushing these serious decisions in front of the client, said more about her incompetence than to discuss with me in front of him. I think I heard a vein pop on her head. She hung up. Now it gets good. Thanks for reading my introduction. 30 minutes pass and I receive an email stating I was on HR watch for misconduct and insubordination. I was required to take 1 mentoring session weekly during 1 month, filling up an Excel through the week with everything I did and recounting on this sessions to see where I could improve. The thing is, she saw the dumpster fire the project was and just got accepted to switch project client, so she was going away next week or so, and my new manager would be a flower of a person who had nothing to do with this crap. I called HR and told them I would like to request her as my personal mentor, as she was the one who pointed so many improvement feedbacks to better my performance and was an example for me of what not to do, but I left this part out. They thought this was an amazing idea. The sessions had her and the HR worker responsible for the case, so she had to put a mentoring face, and lo and behold, I turned into Kaspar Hauser during those sessions. I asked everything. I would fill the Excel to the brim with everything I did, including emails, chat convos, and even screen grabs from my personal phone the client used to message and requested to go through them so she could approve my company speech. I would link Excel files inside this Excel file so she had absolutely everything I did, 1 per row. Those sessions took 2 to 3 hours every Friday, scheduled at 8 a.m. by me, as she would be sure to complain when the team worked until 2 a.m. and I would let them come in late. She would have to rate everything in a drop-down cell, write the week's outcome, and come up with action points for next week. I couldn't help her with this as I was there to learn. In the last meeting, I requested her manager to be on the meeting, a woman who filled my manager gaps when I needed most, and we had an amazing relationship. She agreed, as in her view, this was a successful mentoring case from her employer. I finished the meeting, asked for 2 minutes at the end, and forwarded my 2 weeks, here in Brazil it's 4, written by hand, with all the points that made me quit and receipts, including a part of the fight in front of the client I was able to record with my phone when I saw things going south. I still think about her, so this is the sad thing. But I now have an amazing job at a big tech and vowed to never be like her. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.